What if the scandal Meghan Markle feared most wasn't about Harry at all? What if it was about his uncle, Prince Andrew? And Sarah Ferguson has just confirmed it. That's the thunderclap we open with. A line that jolts you, makes you sit up straighter, and forces you to ask yourself, how deep does this rabbit hole go? For years, royal gossip has swirled with whispers of tension, betrayal, and hidden affairs. But now, one of the royal family's most unpredictable figures, Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, has spoken. And what she revealed about Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and Prince Harry is darker than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is not just another rumor. This is not just tabloid fodder. This is the kind of revelation that shakes marriages, divides families, and threatens to unravel the carefully crafted image of a modern monarchy. But let's pause for a moment. Before we dive headfirst into Sarah Ferguson's shocking claim, let me ask you something. What would you do if you suspected your partner of betraying you? Not with a stranger, but with someone inside your own family. Imagine the tension, the humiliation, the feeling that the world is waiting to pounce on your pain. Would you confront them? Or would you stay silent, fearing the shame of public humiliation? That is exactly the dilemma Prince Harry allegedly faced. Now, let's rewind and set the stage. The royal family has never been free of scandal. From Edward VIII's abdication for Wallis Simpson to Princess Diana's explosive revelations about her marriage, drama has always lurked behind the palace gates. And yet, what Sarah Ferguson has now revealed places Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew at the center of one of the most jaw-dropping twists yet. Why Sarah Ferguson? Why now? Because Sarah has always been a wild card. She's lived on the edge of royal respectability, often shunned but never entirely silenced. She's the duchess who fell from grace but somehow always finds a way back into the conversation. And when Sarah speaks, people listen, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with shock, always with curiosity. So, when she hinted that the rumors about Meghan and Andrew weren't just rumors but reality, it wasn't brushed aside. It landed like a thunderbolt. Let's talk about Meghan first. She was the outsider who shook the monarchy, the American actress who married a prince and promised to modernize the institution. But her relationship with the royals has been riddled with fractures, tension with Kate, icy distance from William, explosive fallout with Charles. And now, if Sarah is to be believed, Meghan's bond with Prince Andrew was more than just a passing connection. It was a scandal that fueled Harry's deepest insecurities. And Harry? He's no stranger to scandal himself. Branded the spare, forever in his brother's shadow, Harry has always lived with an undercurrent of jealousy, pain, and rebellion. When he married Meghan, many thought he had finally found his freedom. But if Sarah's revelation is true, Meghan may have instead brought him his most crushing humiliation yet. Let me paint the picture for you. Harry hears the whispers. Meghan and Andrew, secret meetings, private conversations, moments that stretch beyond what is appropriate. He asks questions. She deflects. He presses. She lashes out. Their marriage turns into a battlefield of suspicion and silence. And looming over it all is the fear. If the public ever knew, Harry wouldn't just be heartbroken. He would be humiliated on a global scale. And this, my friends, is where Sarah Ferguson enters the frame like a firecracker tossed into a powder keg. She has lived with Andrew. She knows his flaws, his appetites, his weaknesses. She knows the way he is around women, the way his charm can be both magnetic and destructive. And so, when Sarah confirmed what many had whispered, that Meghan's closeness to Andrew went far beyond casual, everything shifted. Now, I want you to think about the timing. Why now? Why choose this moment to speak? Some say it's revenge. Others say it's Sarah's attempt to reclaim relevance in a royal world that long ago cast her aside. But there's another possibility, one even more intriguing. Perhaps Sarah simply couldn't keep the secret anymore. And let's not forget the irony. Meghan built her public image around truth, authenticity, and standing against lies. She positioned herself as the victim of royal cruelty, the woman silenced by the firm. And yet, here we are, with allegations that she herself was hiding one of the most scandalous affairs the monarchy has ever faced. So, why does this story matter now? Because we live in an age of exposure. Secrets don't stay buried. The public demands answers. and every crack in the royal family becomes a fissure that could swallow the monarchy whole. But here's the real kicker. This isn't just about Meghan and Andrew. This is about the domino effect. Harry's jealousy, Meghan's defiance, Sarah's vengeance, Charles's panic. Every player in this story has something to lose and something to gain. And while the world debates whether Sarah's revelation is true, Harry is left with the one thing he has always feared: doubt. Because in marriage, betrayal doesn't have to be proven to hurt. The suspicion alone is enough to destroy trust. And when that suspicion involves a family member, especially one as controversial as Prince Andrew, the pain cuts even deeper. So here we are, a scandal that intertwines betrayal, jealousy, silence, and humiliation. A story where Sarah Ferguson, once dismissed as the clown Duchess, becomes the unexpected truth-teller. A story where Meghan's carefully polished image collides with a darker reality. A story where Harry is caught between love and humiliation, loyalty and betrayal. But let me warn you, what comes next takes this scandal from shocking to devastating. Because Sarah Ferguson didn't just hint at the affair. She claimed it was real. And if she's telling the truth, then the heated arguments between Harry and Meghan were far worse than anyone imagined. And that, my friends, is where the story truly begins. Because when the whispers turned to arguments, and the arguments turned to silence, Harry faced a choice that could change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began with whispers in private corridors, rumors so scandalous they sounded more like the plot of a soap opera than the reality of Britain's royal family. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, was said to be far too close to Prince Andrew. At first, the notion was brushed aside as absurd. After all, Andrew was decades older, disgraced, and already under intense scrutiny for his own controversies. But whispers have a way of growing louder when repeated often enough, and soon the private chatter among staff, courtiers, and even family insiders became a drumbeat that couldn't be ignored. Imagine the setting: dimly lit drawing rooms in palaces that have witnessed centuries of betrayals, hushed conversations among aides who have seen more secrets than they'll ever tell, and that tense atmosphere where one wrong word could ruin a reputation forever. Within this world, the whispers about Meghan and Andrew carried a particular weight. Why? Because Meghan was already the outsider, the woman the royal establishment didn't trust. Pair that with Andrew, the uncle no one wanted to discuss, and the rumors took on a life of their own. But let me ask you, if you were Harry, would you ignore such whispers? Could you? You've married a woman you adore, a woman who's faced relentless criticism from the press, only to now hear suggestions that she's entangled in an inappropriate closeness with your uncle? Would you laugh it off, or would that seed of doubt take root, spreading until it poisoned your peace of mind? That's the dilemma Harry allegedly faced. And once suspicion creeps into a marriage, it rarely stays small. The build-up was slow, insidious. Staff noticed Meghan's unusual level of sympathy for Andrew during family discussions, defending him when most others distanced themselves. She was said to praise him for his charm, his ability to understand outsiders. On the surface, that might sound innocent. But to those watching closely, it raised eyebrows. Was Meghan projecting her own struggles with the firm onto Andrew? Or was there something deeper beneath her protective words? Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's ex-wife and longtime confidant, was often present in these settings. She knew Andrew better than anyone. She'd lived through his excesses, his charm, and his scandals. And to Sarah, Meghan's behavior wasn't just eyebrow-raising, it was alarming. This is where the story begins to take a darker turn. Sarah, ever the survivor, had always played a careful game with Andrew. Their relationship, though long divorced, remained close. They lived together at Royal Lodge. They raised their daughters together. Sarah knew what Andrew was capable of, both the good and the very bad. So when she saw Meghan inserting herself into Andrew's orbit, she reportedly became wary. Think about it. You've been married to a man like Andrew. You've watched him navigate power, charm, and scandal. And then, suddenly, a new duchess enters the picture, one desperate for allies, one who understands manipulation of image as well as anyone. Would you stay silent? Or would you begin to take notes? Sarah, as it turns out, didn't stay silent. The whispers became more than whispers when Sarah began quietly warning those around her. She suggested that Meghan was closer to Andrew than was appropriate. She hinted that their private conversations went beyond casual chit-chat. And while few dared to repeat Sarah's words in public, behind closed doors, her warnings spread like wildfire. Now let's pause. The royal family has always operated under a cloak of secrecy. Rumors, affairs, scandals, they've been covered up, hidden away, or managed with a stiff upper lip. But the combination of Meghan, the lightning rod for public scrutiny, and Andrew, already tainted by scandal, was combustible. All it would take was one slip, one revelation, to send the entire monarchy into crisis mode. Harry, meanwhile, was said to be torn. On one hand, he loved Meghan fiercely. He believed her when she told him the rumors were nonsense. On the other hand, the sight of her defending Andrew, laughing with him at family gatherings, and spending time in his company gnawed at him. Jealousy is a powerful poison, and in Harry's case, it may have turned suspicion into obsession. Here's where the story gets even more intriguing. Royal insiders claim that Harry and Meghan began having heated arguments behind palace doors. Harry would question her about Andrew. Meghan, furious at being accused, would lash back, accusing Harry of not trusting her. Their marriage, still relatively new, began to buckle under the weight of suspicion. And through it all, Sarah Ferguson watched. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you could see the train wreck coming long before the people involved did? That was Sarah. She could see Harry's growing jealousy. She could see Meghan's defiance. And she could see Andrew enjoying the attention, perhaps oblivious to the storm he was fueling. Sarah's perspective matters because she isn't just any royal. She's lived the scandals. She's been shamed, ridiculed, and clawed her way back. She knows the damage an affair, real or rumored, can cause. And she knows that once the public gets a taste of such a story, it can't be contained. That's why Sarah's whispers mattered. They weren't just idle gossip. They were warnings. And in the royal world, warnings often mean that the dam is about to break. But here's the cruel irony. The more Harry tried to silence the whispers, the louder they grew. Staff gossiped. Courtiers speculated. Journalists circled. The rumors became a narrative of their own, one that Meghan couldn't control, no matter how carefully she crafted her image. And that's the real danger. Once a story like this catches fire, it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. The damage is done. The seeds of doubt are planted. And for Harry and Meghan, those seeds were enough to ignite a marital war that left both of them scarred. Sarah, of course, knew this. She knew that by dropping even the smallest hint, she could set events in motion that would spiral out of control. Was it deliberate? Was it revenge? Or was it simply Sarah being Sarah, unable to resist the allure of stirring the pot? Whatever the case, her words turned whispers into headlines and whispers into battles. Because once the whispers reached Harry's ears, he couldn't ignore them anymore. He couldn't brush them aside as idle gossip. They became a wedge between him and Meghan, a source of endless fights and sleepless nights. And as Sarah would later reveal, those whispers weren't just rumors. They were a reflection of something real, something that went far deeper than anyone was prepared to admit. But the question is, how did Sarah know? How much did she see? How much did she hear? And more importantly, what happened when she finally spoke out? Because what Sarah said next wouldn't just shock Harry and Meghan. It would send ripples through the entire monarchy. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Sarah Ferguson's shocking claim landed like a thunderclap across royal circles. The affair wasn't just idle gossip. It wasn't merely the fever dream of tabloids hungry for clicks. According to Sarah, it was fact. And that single assertion transformed whispers into a roaring storm. Picture it. A duchess who had lived her entire adult life on the fringes of royal respectability, suddenly stepping forward with a revelation that could destroy Meghan Markle's reputation forever. Sarah wasn't some faceless palace aide or an anonymous source. She was family. She was the ex-wife who had shared decades with Prince Andrew, who knew his habits, his weaknesses, and his darkest tendencies. If anyone was in a position to speak with authority on Andrew's affairs, it was Sarah. But let's pause. Why would Sarah do this? Why step into a firestorm that could scorch her too? That's the question everyone asked, and the answer reveals the layers of rivalry, jealousy, and survival that have always defined Sarah's relationship with the rest of the royal family. Let's rewind. Sarah Ferguson has been many things in her life: scandal-prone duchess, single mother, businesswoman teetering on the edge of financial ruin, and most recently, a kind of eccentric royal aunt tolerated but not embraced. She knows what it feels like to be humiliated by the press. She knows what it means to be cast out, ridiculed, and left for dead by the monarchy. So when Meghan Markle burst onto the scene, praised as the glamorous new Duchess, a modern figure destined to outshine the Windsors, did Sarah see a reflection of herself? Or did she see a rival who needed to be taken down a peg? Because here's the twist. Sarah's claim wasn't delivered as a polished press statement. It wasn't whispered from behind palace walls. It came out casually, almost offhandedly, in conversations with those she trusted. But once Sarah speaks, those words never stay private. They travel, they multiply, and soon enough, they become headline news. Let me ask you, if you were in Sarah's shoes, would you keep quiet? Or would you expose someone you thought was playing with fire, even if it meant igniting a blaze? Sarah's perspective was shaped by her own history with Andrew. She had endured his charm. She had suffered from his recklessness. She had lived through his scandals, including ones that left him disgraced and banished from royal duties. And so, when she claimed that Meghan's relationship with Andrew was real, not imagined, it carried a chilling weight. She wasn't just speculating, she was warning. Now, here's where the irony cuts deep. Meghan Markle built her brand on being a truth-teller. She spoke out against the firm. She presented herself as the victim of a cruel system. She crafted the narrative of authenticity, of fighting for honesty and justice. And yet, Sarah's revelation threatened to flip that image on its head. If Meghan had indeed been entangled in an affair with Andrew, the hypocrisy would be staggering. And what about Harry? Imagine hearing your aunt, your own aunt by marriage, confirm the one rumor that had haunted you. Imagine the fury, the shame, the humiliation that would come crashing down. For Harry, Sarah's words weren't just gossip. They were confirmation. And they made every argument with Meghan, every sleepless night, every gnawing suspicion suddenly feel justified. The palace, of course, went into crisis mode. Courtiers scrambled to contain the damage. They feared that if Sarah's words leaked to the press in their raw form, the monarchy would face a scandal that made even Diana and Charles's marriage look tame. But how do you silence Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess who has built her entire life on refusing to be silenced? This is where the drama intensifies. Meghan, reportedly furious, confronted Sarah directly. Their exchanges were said to be icy, sharp, filled with veiled threats and biting sarcasm. Meghan, used to being in control of the narrative, found herself facing a woman who had nothing to lose and no fear of retaliation. Sarah, after all, had been through it all: public shaming, financial collapse, royal exile. What more could Meghan do to her? Let me pose this to you. Who is more dangerous? The person who has everything to lose, or the one who has already lost it all? Sarah wielded her claim like a weapon, and the implications were devastating. If Meghan had betrayed Harry with Andrew, even emotionally if not physically, it wasn't just a marital issue. It was a royal scandal of historic proportions. It meant the monarchy's black sheep, Andrew, had pulled Harry's wife into his orbit. It meant that Harry, the prince who fled Britain to protect his family from humiliation, had been humiliated in the one way he couldn't survive. And the public? They devoured it. The idea of Meghan Markle, self-proclaimed truth-teller and feminist icon, entangled in an affair with disgraced Prince Andrew, was the kind of irony that tabloids salivate over. Headlines speculated, podcasts dissected, commentators sharpened their knives. Yet, through it all, Sarah maintained a strange calm. She didn't rant. She didn't sensationalize. She simply said it as she saw it. And that, perhaps, made it even more believable. But here's the question that lingers. Was Sarah telling the truth? Or was she weaponizing rumor to destroy Meghan's credibility? After all, Sarah has always thrived in chaos. She has always known how to make herself relevant when the spotlight drifts away. Could this have been her ultimate play for attention? Whatever the answer, the effect was the same. Harry's suspicions deepened. Meghan's fury intensified. The palace's anxiety skyrocketed. And the world began to wonder. If Sarah Ferguson was willing to say this, what else was she hiding? Because this wasn't just about Meghan and Andrew. This was about trust, power, and the dangerous game of secrets that defines the royal family. And soon enough, it wouldn't just be whispers in private circles. Sarah's words would seep into the public domain, igniting a storm that no one, not Meghan, not Harry, not even the king himself, could control. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Harry's discovery didn't come in one dramatic moment, like a scene out of a movie where a letter falls from a drawer or a photograph slips out of an envelope. No, it came in fragments. Pieces of a puzzle that he didn't want to complete but couldn't stop obsessing over. A remark overheard at dinner. A sideways glance between Meghan and Andrew at a gathering. A conversation cut short when he entered the room. Tiny details, meaningless in isolation, but together they painted a picture that gnawed at his sanity. And that's how it often begins, isn't it? Suspicion doesn't need proof. It feeds on imagination. Have you ever found yourself spiraling down that same rabbit hole, wondering if someone you loved was hiding something? Even without evidence, the mere idea takes root, growing darker every time your mind circles back to it. That was Harry's reality. Imagine the weight of it. He's not just any husband. He's a prince, a global figure, with the press dissecting his every facial expression, every gesture, every stray glance. If he showed even a flicker of doubt, the tabloids would pounce. If he dared to confront Meghan publicly, the headlines would be merciless. So he kept it bottled up, or tried to. But suspicion is a cruel master. It leaks into your words, your tone, your silences. And Meghan noticed. Their arguments began quietly. A question here. A tense exchange there. Why were you with Andrew so late? What did you two talk about? Simple enough questions, but Meghan's reactions made them volcanic. She bristled at the implication. She snapped back. She accused him of jealousy, of insecurity, of being paranoid. And maybe she was right. But paranoia feels very much like reality when your heart is on the line. Harry's frustration grew. He had married Meghan believing she was his refuge, his escape from the toxicity of palace life. But now, she was the source of his greatest torment. The irony was unbearable. He wanted answers, but every time he pressed, the walls between them thickened. Meghan, instead of soothing his fears, lashed out. She was furious at being interrogated, furious at being compared, even indirectly, to Sarah Ferguson's warnings, furious at being questioned by a man who was supposed to stand beside her no matter what. And so the fights escalated. These weren't petty spats. These were shouting matches that shook the walls of whatever home they were staying in, whether it was Frogmore Cottage in Windsor or their Montecito mansion. Harry would accuse. Meghan would deflect, turning the blame back on him. You don't trust me, she'd spit. You're letting your family poison your mind. You're supposed to protect me, not attack me. Have you ever been in a fight where both sides believe they're the victim? That's the most destructive kind of argument because there's no resolution, only escalation. That was Harry and Meghan. Behind closed doors, the scenes were explosive. Harry, red-faced and pacing. Meghan, icy one moment and screaming the next. Objects slammed down, doors slammed shut. The tension was unbearable. And yet, when they stepped outside, they had to put on the show. Smiling for cameras, holding hands, projecting unity. The contradiction was exhausting. And through all of this, one thought haunted Harry. What if Sarah Ferguson was right? What if Meghan really had crossed a line with Andrew? This question wasn't just about fidelity. It was about humiliation. Harry had grown up watching his mother, Princess Diana, humiliated on the global stage when Charles's affair with Camilla was revealed. He had sworn never to relive that nightmare. And yet, here he was, fearing the same fate. But this time, it wasn't just his spouse, it was his uncle. Think about that for a moment. How would you feel if the betrayal you feared wasn't with a stranger, but with someone sitting across from you at Christmas dinner? Someone who shared your bloodline? That's the depth of Harry's torment. It's here that irony twists the knife. Harry had always painted himself as the protector of Meghan. In interviews, he spoke of shielding her from the cruelty of the press, from the racism and vitriol of British society. But in private, it was Meghan who now seemed to hold the power, silencing Harry with fear. Fear of exposure, fear of ridicule, fear of becoming the butt of every cruel joke in every corner of the world. And Meghan knew it. She used it. Whenever Harry pressed too hard, she would remind him of what was at stake. "Do you want this out there? Do you want the world laughing at you?" she would hiss. Those words cut him deeper than any accusation. Sarah Ferguson, meanwhile, was quietly watching from the wings. She had lit the match. She had seen the fire spreading. And though she didn't say it outright, those who knew her best could sense the satisfaction. For Sarah, this wasn't just about exposing Meghan. It was about reminding the world that she still mattered, that she still had power. And Harry? He was left feeling cornered, trapped between his love for Meghan, his fear of humiliation, and the gnawing suspicion that he couldn't shake. Every night, the arguments left him more exhausted. Every morning, he woke up wondering how much longer he could go on pretending. Here's the cruel truth. Sometimes silence is louder than words. Harry's refusal to confront Meghan fully, his choice to bottle his humiliation, didn't make the problem go away. It made it fester. And the more it festered, the more destructive it became. Because Meghan wasn't about to back down. She wasn't about to admit anything, even if there was something to admit. To her, this was about control. And to Harry, it was about survival. But what happens when survival clashes with truth? That's the question Harry faced as the arguments turned colder, sharper, and more dangerous. And as Sarah Ferguson prepared to speak again, the one threat Harry feared most was about to become reality. Because the worst part wasn't the whispers. It wasn't the arguments. It wasn't even Sarah's claims. The worst part was knowing that if the truth, whatever it was, ever came out, Harry wouldn't just be broken. He would be humiliated in front of the entire world. And that fear was enough to silence him. But silence only fuels suspicion. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Harry's greatest fear wasn't betrayal itself. It was humiliation. You see, betrayal can be forgiven behind closed doors. A marriage can stumble, break, even heal in private. But humiliation? Public humiliation is eternal. It's the scarlet letter that follows you wherever you go. And Harry, who had lived his entire life under the microscope of a merciless press, knew humiliation better than most. He had been mocked as the reckless prince, the spare, the boy caught in scandal after scandal. He knew the sting of headlines that never die. So when whispers of Meghan's closeness with Andrew began to swell into something more, it wasn't just Meghan's reputation on the line. It was Harry's manhood, his dignity, his very sense of self. Imagine it, to be branded not only the fool whose wife strayed, but the fool whose wife strayed with his own uncle. The sheer audacity of that narrative would be a tabloid dream, a Netflix blockbuster of humiliation. Harry could almost hear the cruel laughter before it even happened. And Meghan knew this. That's where things turned dark. Whenever Harry pressed too close to the truth, Meghan weaponized that fear. "Do you really want this out there?" she would snap. "Do you want to be humiliated in front of the world? Do you want your family laughing at you behind your back? Because that's exactly what will happen if you don't shut this down." It was a brutal form of control. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to threaten. She only needed to remind Harry of the one thing he couldn't bear, the image of himself as the world's laughingstock. Think about it. Haven't you ever avoided a confrontation, not because you believed the other person was innocent, but because you feared what the truth would cost you? That was Harry's reality. He didn't dare push harder. Because if Sarah Ferguson was right, if Meghan had crossed that line, then facing the truth meant detonating his life, his marriage, his image. And Harry, for all his bravado in interviews, was not prepared for that explosion. So he stayed silent. He swallowed his doubts. He let Meghan twist the knife of humiliation until he no longer knew if he was protecting her or protecting himself. But silence didn't bring peace. It brought more arguments. Colder ones. Arguments where Meghan's voice would cut like glass. She would mock his paranoia. She would accuse him of being weak, of letting Sarah Ferguson, a woman Meghan loathed, control his mind. Harry, torn between fury and fear, would lash out in anger, only to retreat again when Meghan reminded him of the stakes. It was a cycle. Suspicion, argument, silence, and then suspicion again. A loop that never broke. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson wasn't done talking. Not by a long shot. And that made everything worse. Sarah knew Harry's weakness too. She had watched him grow up, seen his vulnerabilities. She knew he had inherited Diana's sensitivity and her paranoia about betrayal. She knew humiliation was his kryptonite. And by hinting, then confirming, then doubling down on Meghan's closeness to Andrew, Sarah effectively pushed Harry to the brink. Because here's the cruel paradox. Harry wanted to silence Sarah, but doing so meant acknowledging her words. And acknowledging her words meant admitting there was something to hide. It was a no-win situation, and Harry was trapped in the middle. Let's pause and consider Sarah's role for a moment. Was she exposing the truth out of some sense of moral duty? Or was she twisting the knife for her own gain? Sarah had always been the outsider too, mocked as Duchess of York, humiliated for her financial scandals, treated as the family's embarrassing cousin at weddings. Now, suddenly, she held the power. And for Sarah, power was intoxicating. For Meghan, Sarah's revelations were a declaration of war. Meghan saw Sarah as irrelevant, washed up, desperate for attention. To Meghan, the fact that Sarah could spread a narrative strong enough to shake her marriage was infuriating. She confronted Sarah. Sharp words, icy tones, venom disguised as politeness. Two duchesses locked in a battle of reputation and survival. But here's where the tension turned volcanic. The arguments between Harry and Meghan weren't just about Andrew. They were about control. Meghan controlled the narrative by silencing Harry with fear. Harry controlled nothing. Not the palace, not the press, not even his own household. The more he tried to assert himself, the more Meghan reminded him that one wrong move could destroy him. And Harry believed her. Have you ever felt powerless in your own life? Powerless in your own relationship? That's where Harry lived. A prince, stripped of his voice, silenced by the one person he trusted most. The irony? Harry had fled Britain to escape the humiliation of being the spare, the overlooked prince. Yet in California, in the comfort of Montecito, humiliation haunted him more than ever. And still, he stayed quiet. But Sarah didn't. Because Sarah Ferguson was about to take her whispers public. She was about to throw gasoline on the fire Harry was desperately trying to contain. And once Sarah spoke again, the whispers would no longer be whispers. They would be headlines. Headlines that Harry feared more than anything. Because humiliation wasn't just coming. It was inevitable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Sarah Ferguson had always been unpredictable. She was the Duchess who lived on the edge, the woman who could pivot from self-deprecating humor to explosive confession in the blink of an eye. But in this case, her unpredictability became dynamite. Because Sarah didn't keep her revelation about Meghan and Andrew confined to whispers. She began sharing it, first quietly, then more boldly, with friends, insiders, and anyone within her orbit who was willing to listen. And in Sarah's world, friends didn't just mean a few confidants at tea. It meant journalists she'd known for decades, aristocrats who thrived on gossip, and society players who would spread a salacious story faster than wildfire in dry brush. Think about it. How many scandals in royal history began not with a press release, but with one whispered sentence in the right ear? That's how this began. Sarah, over a glass of wine at a private dinner, leaning in close and saying, "You know, it wasn't just a rumor." Meghan was closer to Andrew than anyone realizes. Those words, so casually spoken, had the weight of a thunderclap. Why? Because Sarah wasn't a nobody. She wasn't an anonymous palace insider in the tabloids. She was Andrew's ex-wife, still living under the same roof as him at Royal Lodge. She knew his habits, his patterns, his darkest secrets. If Sarah said something about Andrew, it was assumed to be true. And so, her word spread. Meghan, of course, caught wind almost immediately. Meghan always caught wind. She was meticulous about monitoring her public image, obsessive about controlling her narrative. The moment she heard Sarah was repeating her claim, Meghan went ballistic. She saw it as an act of war. But here's the twist. Sarah wasn't just striking out blindly. She had motives. She had been sidelined for years, forced into the margins of royal life, while Meghan had stolen headlines worldwide. Meghan was glamorous, adored by Hollywood, and for a brief shining moment, hailed as the savior of the monarchy. Sarah? She was remembered for toe-sucking scandals, bankruptcy, and clinging to Andrew's coattails. Was it jealousy that drove her? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was survival. Because Sarah knew one thing Meghan didn't. In the royal family, power doesn't always come from titles. It comes from stories. Control the story, and you control the perception. Sarah had lived this her entire life. And by seeding this story into the bloodstream of society gossip, she was regaining relevance. She was making herself impossible to ignore. Now let's step into Meghan's shoes for a moment. Can you imagine the rage? The feeling that your carefully crafted public image, your truth, your narrative, your entire reputation, was being dismantled by a woman you considered beneath you? Meghan, who prided herself on her ability to manage the press, suddenly found herself outflanked by Sarah, who played the game with far less polish but far more ruthlessness. This wasn't just gossip. This was image warfare. And Harry? Poor Harry was caught in the middle. On one hand, he wanted to believe Meghan. On the other, the fact that Sarah Ferguson, his aunt by marriage, was the one confirming the rumors shook him to his core. He knew Sarah had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That made her words sting all the more. And so, the arguments intensified. Harry would bring up Sarah. Meghan would scream that Sarah was irrelevant, a has-been desperate for attention. Harry, torn between loyalty and doubt, would spiral into silence. But Sarah wasn't irrelevant anymore. Her story was spreading, quietly, discreetly, but with devastating effect. At dinner parties in Mayfair, at polo matches whispered over champagne, among journalists in Fleet Street who knew better than to publish without evidence, but who tucked the story into their notebooks for later. And that's how scandals grow. Not with a bang, but with 1,000 whispers repeated in drawing rooms and back alleys until the weight of them becomes impossible to ignore. Now, ask yourself, why would Sarah risk this? She was still tied to Andrew, still dependent on the roof at Royal Lodge, still trying to maintain her fragile place in royal society. Why jeopardize all that? The answer, perhaps, lies in Sarah's nature. She thrives on chaos. When things are too quiet, she makes noise. And this was the loudest noise she'd made in years. But there's another layer. Sarah and Meghan never truly clicked. Meghan once boasted in interviews about how Fergie taught her to curtsy before meeting the Queen. To Meghan, it was a charming anecdote. To Sarah, it was insulting, a reminder that she was reduced to a footnote in Meghan's fairy tale. That bitterness, however small, may have grown into something far darker. So when Sarah started telling friends, it wasn't just idle chatter. It was calculated. Every word landed like a dagger, slicing through Meghan's glossy image. And as those daggers flew, Meghan's paranoia grew. She began to suspect everyone. Which friend was leaking? Which aide was whispering? Which relative was siding with Sarah? The irony? Meghan, who had once accused the palace of running smear campaigns against her, was now the victim of one orchestrated not by the firm, but by Sarah Ferguson herself. The fallout was immediate. Society insiders began to whisper openly. Journalists circled like vultures, waiting for scraps of confirmation. And behind palace walls, panic set in. Because if Sarah's words leaked beyond drawing rooms and salons, the monarchy would be dragged into a scandal it couldn't survive. For Meghan, this was the nightmare scenario. She had built her entire persona on being untouchable, a victim turned victor. But now, her empire was crumbling, not because of the British press, not because of the palace machine, but because of Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess who refused to die quietly. And Harry? He was unraveling. The arguments with Meghan left him exhausted. The whispers from Sarah left him broken. He was caught between a wife he wanted to defend and an aunt he couldn't ignore. His silence, once a shield, was becoming a prison. Because Sarah wasn't done. Not even close. Her story had spread among friends. But soon, it would spill beyond private dinners and whispered gossip. Soon, the world would hear it. And once the world heard it, there would be no going back. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The media has always been the royal family's shadow, lurking, waiting, circling. And when Sarah Ferguson's whispers began to seep beyond her circle of friends, the tabloids didn't hesitate. They could smell blood. They could sense a story that was too salacious to ignore. Meghan Markle, already one of the most polarizing figures in the monarchy, allegedly entangled with the disgraced Prince Andrew. At first, it was subtle. A blind item here. A veiled hint there. Gossip columns ran cryptic lines about unexpected alliances forming within the royal family. Society magazines teased unexplained tensions between Harry and Meghan. Headlines didn't dare say it outright, but they didn't need to. The innuendo was enough. Readers filled in the blanks themselves. And the irony? Meghan had spent years decrying the British press for its lies and cruelty. She had positioned herself as the woman silenced by misinformation, the victim of false narratives. Yet now, her image was under siege not by faceless tabloid reporters, but by the words of Sarah Ferguson, words that carried more credibility than Meghan could counter. The media frenzy built slowly, like a gathering storm. And Meghan knew it. She was obsessed with her coverage, combing through articles, dissecting headlines, raging at Harry about every insinuation. But here's the cruel twist. The more she fought it, the more the press circled. Every denial, every attempt at control, only confirmed that something was amiss. And Harry? He was unraveling under the pressure. Imagine living in a world where every newsstand screamed your humiliation back at you, where every headline seemed like a wink and a smirk. Tensions in Montecito, Meghan's secret meetings, Harry's growing jealousy. They didn't have to print the word affair to make their point. It was all there, between the lines. Do you know what makes a rumor most dangerous? Not when it's screamed from rooftops, but when it's whispered everywhere at once. When people lean in over coffee, murmur at dinner parties, speculate online with half-truths. That's where the power lies. And Meghan found herself trapped in that cycle, powerless to stop it. The press had a field day drawing parallels. Princess Diana and Charles. Camilla lurking in the shadows. Now Meghan, allegedly repeating history, only this time with Andrew of all people. The comparisons were brutal, and Harry could feel the ghosts of his parents' marriage haunting his own. And let's not forget the irony of timing. This wasn't just happening in a vacuum. It was unfolding during a period when the monarchy itself was desperate to appear modern, stable, untainted. King Charles had just taken the throne. The world was watching. And now this. A scandal that threatened to eclipse everything else. The palace, of course, went into panic mode. Leaks were denied. Rumors were dismissed. Sources close to the couple insisted all was well. But behind the scenes, courtiers scrambled. They had seen this playbook before, and they knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. Meghan, meanwhile, turned her fury on Sarah Ferguson. She accused her of jealousy, of desperation, of clinging to relevance by destroying someone else. Meghan ranted about Sarah being a relic of the past, a woman whose scandals had already defined her. But here's the thing. Sarah's very irrelevance was what made her so dangerous. She had nothing to lose. Meghan, on the other hand, had everything. And Harry? He was sinking. He began withdrawing, isolating himself, unable to bear the humiliation. He would snap at Meghan, then retreat into silence. He was furious with Sarah, but powerless to stop her. He wanted to defend Meghan, but doubted her all the same. His entire world was collapsing under the weight of speculation. Ask yourself, what's worse, the truth of betrayal or the perception of it? In Harry's case, perception was enough to break him. Because once the media had the scent of scandal, it didn't matter whether Sarah's claim was entirely true. It only mattered that it sounded true. And let's not forget Andrew in all this. For years, he had been the royal family's pariah, stripped of duties, humiliated by his ties to Epstein. Now, bizarrely, he found himself back in the headlines, but linked to Meghan, the Duchess who had once promised to modernize the monarchy. The combination was toxic, radioactive, and it was irresistible to the press. Meghan's team tried everything. Carefully crafted statements, strategic appearances, even staged photo ops of Harry and Meghan holding hands, smiling, projecting unity. But those glossy images rang hollow. The press wasn't buying it. The public wasn't buying it. And Harry certainly wasn't buying it. Because the cracks were showing. Every time Meghan smiled for the cameras, Harry's eyes betrayed him. The suspicion, the weariness, the humiliation, it was written on his face. And cameras never lie. Sarah Ferguson, meanwhile, sat back and watched. She didn't need to fan the flames anymore. The fire had already caught. The press had picked it up, and once they had, there was no stopping it. And that's the real danger of royal scandals. They don't just affect the individuals involved. They consume the entire monarchy. They become history. Diana and Charles, Edward and Wallis, and now, potentially, Meghan and Andrew. But here's where the story took an even darker turn. The palace wasn't just scrambling to contain the press. King Charles himself was forced to intervene. Because the monarchy could survive many things. But not this. And as Charles stepped into the drama, Harry and Meghan's marriage faced a reckoning unlike anything they had endured before. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. King Charles had always preferred to manage scandals from a distance. A quiet word with an aide. A firm instruction to the communications team. A carefully worded statement that calmed the storm without ever addressing it directly. That was the Windsor way. Control the narrative, never fan the flames. But this time, distance wasn't enough. Because Sarah Ferguson's whispers had done something no palace aide could undo. They had fused Meghan's name with Andrew's in the public imagination. And that was catastrophic. Charles knew the stakes. His reign was still fragile, his crown still new. He had spent decades waiting for this role, decades weathering his own humiliations with Camilla, decades being compared unfavorably to Diana. And now, barely settled into his kingship, he was faced with a scandal that threatened to eclipse his every effort at stability. Meghan Markle, already controversial, was now being linked to the one figure Charles most desperately needed the public to forget, Andrew. For Charles, this wasn't just about gossip. This was about survival. So, for the first time in a long time, the king decided to act directly. He summoned Harry. Not a gentle invitation, a command. And Harry knew the weight of that call. The meeting was tense from the start. Charles, sitting stiffly, his jaw clenched, his fingers drumming on the armrest. Harry, defensive before the conversation even began, bracing himself for criticism. And Meghan, though not physically present, was the invisible shadow looming over every word. Charles didn't mince words. "This cannot go on," he told Harry. His voice was sharp, his tone clipped. He spoke not as a father, but as a monarch. The whispers about Meghan and Andrew are intolerable. They are poisoning the institution. Do you understand the damage this is causing? Harry bristled. "Do you think I don't know that?" he snapped. His voice cracked with both anger and shame. "Do you think I don't live it every day?" Charles leaned forward. His eyes were cold, not compassionate. "Then control it. Control her. Because if you don't, this family will be destroyed." That word, destroyed, hung in the air like a death sentence. Harry recoiled. He wanted to defend Meghan, to insist that the rumors were baseless, Sarah Ferguson's jealousy-fueled fantasy. But he couldn't. Not convincingly. Not with the doubt gnawing at him. Not with the arguments still ringing in his ears. And Charles saw it. "Good God," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "You don't even believe her, do you?" Harry's silence was answer enough. Imagine that moment. A father seeing his son not only broken but powerless. A king realizing that the very woman his son had defied the monarchy to protect might be its undoing. For Charles, it was a moment of fury and perhaps vindication. He had always suspected Meghan would bring trouble. Now, Sarah Ferguson had handed him the proof. But Charles wasn't finished. He reminded Harry of the monarchy's history, of Edward VIII and Wallis, of Diana and Charles, of scandals that nearly toppled the crown. Do you want to be remembered as the man who repeated history? The fool who handed the monarchy to the wolves? Harry exploded. "I left the monarchy for Meghan. I gave it all up for her. And now you're telling me I'm the one who will destroy it." His voice broke on the last words, the raw pain of betrayal bleeding through. But Charles didn't flinch. "Yes," he said coldly, "because you chose wrong. And now, we're all paying the price." Those words hit Harry like a punch. And then came the ultimatum. Charles told Harry to fix it. To silence Sarah. To put Meghan back in line. To make the scandal disappear, or face the consequences. What consequences? Harry asked, his voice low, almost trembling. Charles didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. The threat was clear. Stripped titles. Severed ties. Permanent exile. For Charles, the monarchy came first. Always. But here's the irony. Meghan wasn't one to be silenced. She wasn't going to play the obedient Duchess. And Harry knew it. The very demand Charles was making, control her, was the one thing Harry couldn't do. He had tried, and every attempt had backfired spectacularly. Meghan wasn't just his wife. She was his firebrand, his defiance, his rebellion against the institution Charles was now demanding he protect. So Harry left the meeting broken, humiliated, and more trapped than ever. He was caught between his father's ultimatum and his wife's fury, between Sarah Ferguson's whispers and his own gnawing suspicion, between loyalty to the monarchy he had fled and the marriage he was trying desperately to hold together. And Meghan? When Harry told her of Charles's warning, she erupted. She accused Charles of orchestrating the smear campaign, of using Sarah Ferguson as a pawn to destroy her. She painted herself once again as the victim, the outsider under attack from the powerful machine. And Harry, torn to pieces, could do nothing but watch as the battle lines hardened even further. But Charles wasn't bluffing. He had drawn his line in the sand. And the monarchy was bracing itself for war. Because Sarah Ferguson had set the fire, the press had fanned the flames. And now the king himself was stepping into the inferno. And that, my friends, was only the beginning. Because Meghan had no intention of bowing to Charles. In fact, she was about to strike back, with a weapon that could turn the entire scandal on its head. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Meghan Markle had been cornered before, by the British press, by palace insiders, by courtiers whispering behind her back. But this felt different. This wasn't a faceless enemy. This wasn't a tabloid headline she could dismiss as untrue and damaging. This was Sarah Ferguson, a woman who had lived in her world, who understood its traps, and who had the audacity to throw her weight against Meghan in full view of the royal family. And Meghan wasn't going to take it lying down. When Harry relayed Charles's warning, that Meghan must be controlled, that Sarah's whispers had to be silenced, Meghan's fury ignited like gasoline on open flame. She paced the room, her hands slicing the air as she spoke, her voice dripping with venom. Sarah thinks she can destroy me? A woman who begged her way back into relevance, who's only remembered for toe-sucking scandals and bankruptcy. She wants a fight? She'll get one. For Meghan, this wasn't just personal, it was existential. She had built her entire brand on narrative control. From the Oprah interview to the Netflix series, Meghan thrived on crafting her story, positioning herself as both victim and victor. But Sarah had shattered that control. With a few casually dropped sentences, she had yanked the wheel from Meghan's hands. And Meghan couldn't bear it. The first confrontation came at a private family gathering. Meghan knew Sarah would be there, and she came prepared, not with calm diplomacy, but with sharp words disguised as civility. Picture the scene, a long dining table at Royal Lodge, laughter echoing, crystal glasses clinking. Meghan leaned across to Sarah, her smile tight, her eyes blazing. "You've been talking a lot, Sarah," she said softly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Careful what you say. Stories have a way of coming back to haunt people." Sarah didn't flinch. She smiled in return, wide and unbothered. "Oh, darling," she replied with that infamous Fergie chuckle. "Stories are all we've ever had, haven't we? Some of us just happen to know more interesting ones than others." The tension was electric. Guests glanced nervously at one another. No one dared intervene. Two duchesses, circling each other like predators, their words sweet but dripping with poison. After that, there was no turning back. Meghan launched her counteroffensive not just in person, but in the press. Subtle digs began appearing in friendly outlets. Pieces praising Meghan's resilience, contrasting her modern strength with outdated relics of the monarchy. Social media buzzed with speculation that Sarah was jealous of Meghan's success, that she was bitter, irrelevant. Meghan had her army, and she unleashed it. But Sarah had something Meghan couldn't control: credibility. For all her scandals, Sarah was family. She had history with Andrew. She had lived in the palace. She wasn't an outsider throwing rocks at the crown. She was an insider with receipts. And when she laughed off Meghan's accusations of jealousy, people believed her. Harry, of course, was caught in the crossfire. Meghan demanded he take her side publicly, to defend her against Sarah. But Harry hesitated. Deep down, he knew Sarah wasn't inventing these claims out of thin air. That hesitation enraged Meghan. "You'd rather believe her than me?" she hissed during one of their fights. "Your pathetic family over your own wife." Harry, broken and exhausted, could only retreat into silence. But his silence was its own answer, and Meghan knew it. The war between Sarah and Meghan escalated. Invitations to social gatherings became battlegrounds. Every look, every laugh, every toast was loaded with meaning. Meghan tried to isolate Sarah, painting her as a bitter has-been. Sarah, meanwhile, doubled down, repeating her story with a calm, almost smug assurance that infuriated Meghan even more. It all came to a head at a private charity event, where both women were present. Meghan arrived dressed to kill, every inch the Hollywood Duchess. Sarah, by contrast, leaned into her eccentric persona, laughing loudly, making herself impossible to ignore. At one point, they found themselves side by side in the reception line. Meghan leaned close, her voice icy. "You don't know what you're playing with, Sarah. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Sarah turned, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Oh, darling," she whispered back. "I've regretted everything in my life already. What's one more?" That single line captured everything. Meghan had power. Sarah had nothing to lose. And in battles like these, the one with nothing to lose is the most dangerous of all. But here's the irony. Meghan's counterattack only made the story grow. By lashing out, by trying to silence Sarah, she gave the whispers legitimacy. The press feasted on the Duchess versus Duchess drama. Headlines screamed of royal catfights, of dueling duchesses, and the public couldn't look away. The fallout at home was brutal. Harry and Meghan's arguments reached new levels of viciousness. Meghan accused him of weakness, of betrayal, of being too afraid to defend her. Harry, in turn, accused her of dragging him into a war he couldn't win. Their home became a battlefield, every room echoing with accusations and slammed doors. And through it all, Sarah Ferguson smiled. She had reclaimed relevance. She had positioned herself as the truth-teller, the Duchess who dared to say what no one else would. And Meghan? Meghan was rattled in a way she hadn't been since first stepping into royal life. But the war between the two duchesses was far from over. Because what Sarah was about to do next would take the whispers out of drawing rooms and throw them onto the global stage. And Meghan would be powerless to stop it. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Montecito was supposed to be their sanctuary, a sun-soaked retreat where Harry and Meghan could escape the suffocating grip of the palace and the snarling hounds of the British press. A sprawling mansion with manicured gardens, a perfect symbol of the freedom they claimed to have won. But by the time Sarah Ferguson's whispers metastasized into a full-blown narrative, Montecito had become something else entirely. It was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. Inside its grand walls, the marriage that once looked untouchable was unraveling. Every room echoed with tension. Every smile for the cameras was followed by icy silence when the doors closed. The fallout from Sarah's campaign hit harder in California than it ever could have in London. Why? Because in Britain, scandal was expected. In America, Meghan and Harry had built themselves into something larger than royals. They had become brands. A Hollywood power couple. Partners in lucrative Netflix deals, Spotify contracts, philanthropic ventures. And in that world, perception is everything. The rumor of betrayal with Andrew didn't just threaten their marriage. It threatened their empire. Meghan felt it immediately. The phone calls from friends grew shorter. The invitations slowed. The carefully curated glow of Hollywood acceptance dimmed as whispers swirled through Beverly Hills dinner parties. Meghan, who had always been hyper-attuned to her social standing, was furious. "They're talking about me like I'm a joke," she raged one night, pacing their Montecito kitchen. All because of Sarah, a woman who should be irrelevant. Harry, slumped at the counter, rubbed his face with tired hands. He had no energy left to fight. The endless arguments had hollowed him out. And Meghan's fury wasn't just aimed at Sarah anymore. It was aimed at him. "You don't defend me," she snapped. "You let them believe it's true. You sit there, sulking, while I'm being dragged through the mud. You're weak, Harry. Weak." The words cut deeper than she realized. Because Harry wasn't just battling Meghan. He was battling himself. He wanted to believe her, desperately. But every reminder of Sarah's certainty, every headline hinting at tensions, Every flashback to Diana's humiliation left him choking on doubt. At night, when the house was silent, Harry would lie awake and stare at the ceiling. He could hear the laughter of the tabloids, the whispers of courtiers, the mocking voices of his own family. The fool prince. The one whose wife betrayed him. That fear haunted him more than anything. And Meghan noticed. She accused him of paranoia, of letting Sarah and Charles poison his mind. But her deflections only deepened his suspicion. The marriage that had once thrived on unity, the world against them, was now divided from within. Their Montecito circle noticed too. Friends who visited left uneasy, whispering about raised voices and slammed doors. Staff spoke of icy mornings where Meghan and Harry wouldn't exchange a word. Even their children, Archie and Lilibet, became unwitting pawns, Meghan clutching them close during rows, Harry storming out of rooms to avoid fighting in front of them. And the irony? The couple who had sold their love story to the world as a fairy tale of freedom were now prisoners of suspicion and silence.